Fedheads, you're tuned in to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is Sharing Our Pairings, episode 115, Davidoff Late Hour. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, joined as always by my co-host, Trippy Trent. We are broadcast around the world and picked up on the Armed Forces Radio Network. You can tune in live at youtube.com, although shortly you can tune in after the show at youtube.com. We will be transitioning over to live on Facebook only, so thanks to all our live Facebook listeners. Appreciate all your comments, questions, feedback, and emoticons. And of course, can't forget about our podcast listeners out there in droves. We know you guys are out there, guys and girls, supporting us. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Trippy, thanks for joining me tonight. How's it going?
Great. I'm ready to get into it here. Some scotches I've never had before, and a cigar that, as we were talking before the show, I've smoked a couple of these already. This is actually my last one, unfortunately.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to prep for the show, and kind of because we have a few different sizes, I like to smoke a few Vitolas. I don't often have the time to smoke a few different Vitolas of something and kind of try it out and see what the other performances are. Famously, the Yamasa last year had a radically different performance, and for me the Pyramides was the best, so it was kind of interesting to try different Vitolas of this. I smoked the Churchill on the weekend, and the first thing, we were talking offline in the green room, and the first thing I commented on the Toro here is that, man, is it spicy, like way. I barely got any spice in the Churchill, and this thing is just coming right out of the gate with tons of spice. And of course, I think, as always, our Skype stream just let us down there because Trippy froze up. So I'm just going to fill for a moment. This is the latest release from Davidoff. It's called the Late Hour. We are smoking the Late Hour Winston Churchill is specifically the name of the cigar. And this is the Toro size. Of course, Trippy has all the specs, which is unfortunate because I do not have any of the specs prepared as we sit here and dance a little bit. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're pairing tonight. Normally we'd go, we'd pair up with beers, or we'd pair up with a combination of beers and spirits, or who knows what. But tonight we've gone entirely whiskey, and Trippy's kind of gone highfalutin, and I've kind of gone lowfalutin. That's how we've set it up. And Trippy's back.
There we go.
So I was just kind of filling the gap there. So Trippy, I was just explaining that we're smoking the Late Hour Winston Churchill, and we've opted for entirely a whiskey tonight. You've kind of gone highfalutin, and I've kind of gone a little lowfalutin. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the Late Hour and the blend and whatnot.
Yeah, so I believe we're both smoking the Toro, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a 6x54. This is an interesting cigar because it's a combination of all the things that have been really successful for Davidoff in the last few years. The Winston Churchill, of course, has been very successful for them. And then the American Barrel Age series, and now the Nicaraguan Barrel Age series that's just hitting the shelves from Camacho, which they own. And this kind of combines those two. So this is a very Winston Churchill style blend. But one of the fillers is aged in Scotch barrels.
Interesting.
So this is a Ecuadorian Habano Marron Oscuro. I don't know what the Marron means. I haven't heard that before. Wrapper, Mexican San Andreas binder. Filler is Dominican Olor, Piloto Cubano, and San Vicente Mejorado. Some Esteli Viso, and then some Condega Viso that's aged in Speyside barrels for 3 months, turned, and then aged for another 3 months, for a total of 6.
Wow.
And I really do get a little bit of that kind of Scotch influence, but it's very, very restrained. Mm-hmm. It's not quite as intense as like the American Barrel Aged.
Yeah, it's a subtle note. I mean, sort of fitting with the profile of Davidoffs, which are really known for subtle complexity. Now, one thing I think I found very different on the Churchill versus the Toro. The Toro, as I mentioned, kind of started out with a lot of spice. So maybe that's the Esteli and Condega Visos really coming to the forefront. Because on like I said, on the Churchill, I mean, I found it very elegant, but I was getting this sort of interesting vegetal note, like a chlorophyll note that was really prominent on the Churchill, and I'm not really getting it at all here on the Toro. So I don't know if it was just that particular cigar that I smoked, or did you say you've smoked the Churchill?
Yeah, I don't think I tasted the like a vegetal note really.
Interesting.
There's a little bit of that kind of mushroom note in the back,
Hmm.
and
Definitely got the mushroom.
a lot of like sweetness and sort of a rich oaky cedary woodiness. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Todd Richter pointed out, I forgot to mention how much they cost. So these come in 20 boxes of 20, and those nice, like, 4 count travel packs that Davidoff has been selling the last few years. They run $17.50 for the Robusto, up to $20.10 for the Churchill. And I think this one is somewhere around $18.50. So they're going to cost you a couple ducats. But
Couple ducats.
it does say Davidoff on it.
Hmm. So I mean, I'm definitely getting a little bit of mushroom on this one. Really powdered, sweet, powdered like powdered sugar for the sweetness. So it's
Yeah.
not overly, it's not running over my palate. It's not a sickly sweet. It's a really nice, nuanced, powdered sugar sweetness. And like I said, there's a lot of baker spice in there,
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
get a lot of it. Like it's right on the center of my tongue after each draw too.
Yeah, and I find it's closer in body to the more recent Davidoff stuff in the mid 2000s or so. Pretty much everything from Davidoff was between mild and medium, maybe medium plus.
Yeah.
And this is firmly medium plus to almost full. It's got way more richness and depth of flavor than most of the Davidoff range has historically.
Yeah, I feel like with the release of the original Davidoff Oscuro and the Nicaragua, it really
Mhm.
signaled a change in blend strength for Davidoff. Because, and I don't know if that was an intentional thing or they've just recognized a lot more success in the industry with those blends that they're kind of started to realize that yes, most of the market is in that light to medium minus group, but you're going to get a lot more people going nuts and spending the $17 to $20 if your cigar is a little bit more medium plus, and it seems like all of their most recent releases, including last year's Yamasa, were all in that medium plus range of strength and flavor. Well, flavor complexity, and some of them are full plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think it's more of a consumer market thing. I mean, they kind of had the medium body market cornered for the high end stuff, um, but they didn't have anything in that more full bodied, higher strength kind of range, which is where people like us kind of live for what we smoke day to day.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And it's tough to say whether I would pay $17 for it because like really, anytime you go over the $12 to $13 mark, you're really starting to get into the ultra premium category.
Hmm. Yeah,
And that's a tough market. Having smoked the last year's Yamasa, I would say that that cigar is worth every penny. Like that was one of the best Davidoffs I've ever smoked. Although a lot of reviewers might disagree with me on that,
yeah,
but so far so good. This is I'm only an inch in, but the Churchill was fantastic, although very different from the Toro. So it'll be interesting to sit down. I'm going to do a formal review of the Robusto, and we can kind of do because you're going to do a formal review of the Churchill. I
yeah.
want to do a formal review of the Robusto and kind of see how those two contrast in terms of what flavors they bring to the market. Because every Vitola, regardless of what a manufacturer wants to blend it, every Vitola is going to have a different performance.
Yeah, and it seems like there used to be more of the kind of mono blend for a
Mhm.
brand where they would kind of have the exact same blend for each vitola,
Yeah.
and now it's very very common to have uh, Churchills are usually a little bit less Lajero, a little kind of smoother and more elegant. Toros are generally the strongest, and then some people decide to make the Robusto the strongest.
Yeah.
Uh, and I forgot to mention about this. The accessories that they came out with for this year are really cool. They've got a couple really nice high end humidors, of course. They've got a nice round ceramic ashtray that's like $300 or something. But kind of the shining star that I'm really excited about and I kind of want to buy is the whiskey glass. Have you seen that?
Mm-mm.
So it's like a rocks glass, and it's got the Winston Churchill Davidoff logo etched in it. But then it's got two little cutouts around the rim, so You can rest your cigar across it, and it's like a cigar rest built into the top of the glass,
Oh,
which is just
baller.
a really cool feature to have. And it's just a nice looking glass. But they are, I believe it's 95 for a set of 2. If it was a set of 4, it'd be a no brainer buy for me. But I don't know about $50 for a glass.
Yeah, I mean that's I don't know. I mean, part of me says I could totally go for that because, I'm a bit of a whiskey glass guy, but the other part of me says, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'd drop that. I mean, I guess if you're already dropping $17 to $20 on
A
a
single
Davidoff,
cigar.
maybe you're the kind of guy that the whiskey glass is going to appeal to. I'm running into a tough issue here.
Uh-oh.
Hmm.
Technical difficulties as always.
Well, so the latest iteration of Skype has decided to put a little window of me in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, and there doesn't seem to be a
Oh,
way to
yeah, I
turn
see
that
that.
off, which is undesirable, and I wish they would
Yeah,
stop doing stuff like that. And there doesn't seem to be any way to turn that off.
fun.
Yeah, I can make it bigger and I can make it smaller, but I can't turn it off. Just another exciting day here on live broadcast. It's all good.
That's really weird.
Hmm.
I don't understand how Skype works sometimes, but we'll roll with the punches. Let's get into our first pairing here. What's your first pairing?
So I went a little. Sorry, I'm messing around.
You're fiddling.
I'm fiddling. Um, let me just restore the windows here back to the way they were.
While you're doing that, we have another audience question from Todd Richter. He wants to know if Cuban liquor is any good. And I would say yes, it is very good. The 3 year or whatever it is, I think it's the 3 year is like the entry level Havana Club. Not my cup of tea. I mean, I wouldn't recommend drinking that straight. Mix it with Coke, and you've got yourself a nice Cuba Libre. But it's a good rum for mixing. The 7 year is pretty good for sipping, but not the best. And when you get in, last week I had the Selection de Maestros on the show that John was kind enough to drop off for me, and that one is where that one's like rainbows and baby giggles, as Logan would say.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of criticism could be leveled towards Cuba Tobacco and some of their production standards and maybe some of the things they've done in past years. But I think that it's tough to criticize their spirits. I mean, they've got,
Yeah,
gosh, almost 400 years now of rum history. Certainly, whether it's by design or just by the fact that they can't necessarily get some stuff for production, all of their production for stuff like rum is truly organic, and that's not by design. That's just by the nature of the island.
yeah,
So I think what ends up happening is you get this really authentic spirit that's really produced in an authentic way. Is it markedly better than some of the best rums you can get from, say, Venezuela or the Dominican Republic or any of the other great rum producing nations in the world? No, but it is different. It is a unique product, and when you've had Cuban rum, Cuban spirits, they're quite good. I mean, I've certainly got my fair share of Cuban rums, and I would say that the like you said, the higher end rums, once you go over Havana Club 7, you start to get into some really nice rums, and I think
yeah,
the Maestro de Selection is kind of one of the shining hallmarks of what they produce for sure.
yeah. The 7 to me is one of the better $20 bottles of rums out there. Um, but it's not a fantastic rum. It's not going to blow you away, but it's
Yeah,
different.
yeah. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Um, So getting back to just doing a quick introduction before we take our first break here. So I've gone a little low falutin, and I've kind of mixed it up with some Japanese whiskey. I am pairing. I don't know what order you're doing your spirits in, but I've got my Glenfarclas second on purpose here. So I basically bookmarked the Glenfarclas here with a Nikka whiskey to start with and a Nikka whiskey to finish intentionally, because the first Nikka whiskey I've got here is the Nikka whiskey coffee grain. And it's not a single malt. It's a coffee grain whiskey, which means it's a combination of grain whiskey, in this case, probably corn malt, and then malted barley. So I kind of described it pre-show as I was cheating and having a couple sips as a combination of really a mashup between like a single malt and grain whiskey, like a bourbon.
Hmm.
And it makes for a really interesting combination because both of those spirits combine really nicely. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once I talk about our first sponsor of the night here. So just remind our audience, you are tuned into Sharing Our Pairings episode 115. This is the Davidoff Late Hour. And I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon. We are broadcast live around the world, picked up on the Armed Forces Radio Network. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Trippy Trent. Please stay tuned for a word from one of our sponsors. Brought to you by Gurkha Cigars. Gurkha Cigars, makers of the world's finest cigars. Try the 93 rated Heritage featuring Rosado, Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, Nicaraguan binder, and Dominican, Pennsylvanian, and Nicaraguan fillers. Blended by Gurkha's blending team at American Caribbean Cigars, it is hand-rolled Nicaraguan, available in 35-count boxes. Talk to your local B&M about the Heritage today, or talk to them about other fine Gurkha cigars. Whatever your taste preferences, Gurkha has a cigar that's right for you.
If I click it, it gets
and
tiny.
I'm back. Yeah, I wish I could make that little window go away, but our audience is just going to have to live with it. So, holding up this whiskey, you can see it's whiskey color. You know, nothing too exciting. It's kind of got that honey straw color. The nose definitely belies the single malt that's in there. Because I really get that bourbony corn sweetness. You know, if you sniff a normal bourbon, I get a lot of that malted corn in there. It's very tasty, and I bought it for a reason. Now, interestingly enough, this bad boy comes in at 45%. In fact, both of the Japanese whiskeys I have tonight come in at 45%, and we've talked in the past how most Japanese whiskeys come in at 43%. So these are kind of oddities. Both of these that I have tonight are from the Nikka Whiskey Company. Founded, of course, by Masataka Takatsuru, who was the first commercial Japanese distiller in 1924. Nikka Whiskey was named such in 1952. It had a very long name prior to that, and I'm not going to go over that history. Yoichi is one of the distilleries they have, and it is one of the distilleries that I'm featuring tonight, which is located in the northern end of Japan. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. You got Miyagikyo, which is central Japan, and then you've got Moji, which is southern Japan. They also own a number of other bottling plants and other distilleries. So they've got Sapporo, they've got Hirosaki, Tojiki, and Nishinima, and Kashiwa. And Kashiwa is the bottling plant. But I'll let you talk about your first drink of the night here as I take some sips and try and get some flavor notes.
So all of the whiskeys I'm drinking tonight were sponsored by Cigar Surgeon.
Nice.
Thank you, John.
No problem.
Sponsoring the show for me. And they're all whiskeys that I haven't had before. But I'll go over the history of the distillery before I introduce the whiskey. So this is Inchgower. They're in the Speyside region, founded in 1871. They have 2 wash stills, 2 spirit stills, with a capacity of 1.9 million liters, or just over 500,000 gallons. They're actually owned by Diageo, and I didn't know this. They're a major component in Bell's blended whiskey. But what I'm drinking here is Inchgower 82. So this is distilled in 1982, and of course barreled as well, and then bottled in 2010 by Berry Brothers in Rudd. I assume they're a private bottler. Correct, John?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that this is 28 years aged, and it comes in at 56.2 ABV, which is a fairly high cask strength. And you can see it's got kind of a light amber, dark straw kind of color. I'm excited to try this one. It smells like, when I opened the bottle this morning just to smell it, it smells like a humidor. Cedar, a little bit of sweetness, like some kind of brown sugar, and it just smells delightful.
And quite honestly, it's really rare to get an older whiskey that is cask strength. I mean, that's part of the reason why an independent bottler is nice to have, is because usually the big guys or even the middle guys won't bottle an aged expression like that at cask strength, because you got to think, at 60%, they're essentially losing a bottle of whiskey for every 2 bottles at 60%, they could have gotten a third bottle. So in essence, they're already losing money because it's an old whiskey. You're losing 33% off the top because you could be getting an extra bottle out of that bottling. that's not an inexpensive proposition in an industry where the demand far outstrips the supply,
Yeah.
especially on aged stuff. So, of course, I'm going, like I said, in the opposite direction. This is really the everyman whiskey, and it's really good. I mean, it's such a great mashup of really a really light bourbon that doesn't have a lot of pepper. It doesn't have that sort of super corn forward bourbon to it, just enough to give you the vanilla notes and the kind of candied notes. And then underneath that, it's got that really nice malted barley. And I mean, it's not breaking the bank in terms of flavor complexity, but what it does do is it's a nice, easy sipping whiskey that's very approachable, and I think it goes well with the cigar because in this case, it's not running the cigar over. It's not necessarily highlighting the cigar. It's really just if I was sitting down in a really nice lounge somewhere and I was lighting up this Davidoff, I could see myself pouring this whiskey, if only because I could have a couple, 2 or 3 of these and not take away from the cigar. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, this whiskey is delightful.
Uh-huh.
It's it starts off buttery with some hard candy sweetness. That's what whiskey geeks call it, which is kind of like, it's like those Werther's Originals. It's kind of sweet caramel, but that specific flavor that you only get from a hard candy.
Uh-huh.
And then it's got a little bit of almost leathery kind of bitterness, and it's got a really surprisingly clean finish.
Yeah, the nose. I think the nose on that whiskey really. It's kind of one of those sneakers. Like you nose it and you're like, okay, well, this is going to be like huge oak. I'm probably going to get a lot of spice off the oak. It's just going to be like over the top, and it doesn't end up being that at all. Like it's not like that at all.
There's no spice. There's very little oakiness. It's a really elegant whiskey, and I think it goes really well with the cigar. I chose all Speyside whiskeys because the cigar or the tobaccos are aged in Speyside barrels, and I think this one complements the cigar perfectly.
We probably could have called this show Highfalutin, Lowfalutin, really, if we thought about it.
This is a pre-record, so there's still time
There's still time.
update the YouTube name.
But you know what? We're rolling with it because that's what I've decided. Now, little known fact, a lot of people don't know this about me, but my namesake, my birth namesake, is the same as the namesake of this cigar.
I didn't actually know that about you until I saw your email.
Yeah. And now I don't know if my dad did that on purpose, but I have to assume he did. And I guess it kind of makes sense that eventually I would become a cigar guy because I'm named after probably one of the most famous, certainly recognizable cigar celebrities in history, I would think.
I mean, yeah, I think, in my opinion, Winston Churchill is kind of the highest, the most recognized cigar smoker of all time.
Yeah.
You never see a picture of him without a cigar. He famously smoked cigars all day, all night, which this cigar is named the Late Hour because he spent late nights planning stuff for the war, smoking a cigar.
Now I'm kind of getting to the sort of to the end of the last third here. I'm kind of puffing probably a little bit faster than I should. And I have found that the baking spice has calmed down. And I found the baking spice has kind of moved from the center of my tongue to kind of the back of my tongue. It's dropped off a little bit in intensity, which is probably good because I think if it had kept up in that same level of intensity, it would have been a little bit much. And I find as a result that powdered sugar sweetness is really coming to the forefront. I'm gonna take a couple retrohales here and see if I can get anything else out of this cigar.
I get it's got a little bit of black pepper on the palate, but I really get it in the back of the throat, which is kind of different. I don't get that from a lot of cigars.
The retrohale is the retrohale is lovely. In fact, I'd say so far I'm probably, and I'm a big fan of Churchills when I have the time to smoke them, but I would say that the retrohale here is quite elegant, and I think I am enjoying the Toro more than the Churchill size. And again, I was getting a very different profile on the Churchill, like radically different flavor on the profile on the Churchill than I am off the Toro. I think the Toro is probably a little bit more to my taste preferences because it's a little bit more intense than the Churchill. So if you're looking at Vitolas and you're looking for something a little bit subtler, the Churchill is probably the way to go. If you're looking for something a little bit more intense, this Toro, so far so good.
Yeah, it's certainly more intense than the Toro, or than the Churchill rather.
Kind of excited to see how the Robusto stacks up. Again, I think this this coffee grain whiskey from Nikka, it's not at all going to break the bank in terms of flavor complexity. In fact, doing very little for the cigar, other than to say I'm pairing a whiskey with the cigar. To me, this is going to rank kind of lowish in terms of flavor complexity, but that isn't to say it isn't enjoyable. Like, this is absolutely a pairing I would do again. Um, Mostly, I think, because I like the whiskey and I like the cigar. They just, unfortunately, in this case, the whiskey's just not really doing much to highlight the cigar at all, I don't think.
And I'm having the opposite experience. I could drink this whiskey with this cigar all day long.
Yeah.
I think that the sweetness that you get from the whiskey with that kind of butteriness really just fits perfectly with the flavors from the cigar. It might actually even go better with the Churchill since there's no spice coming from the whiskey.
Mhm. Yeah, I could totally see that. So, as much as I could sit here and drink this whiskey with this cigar all night, and believe me, I could, I think I'm going to go on to one of my highfalutin pairings of the night. And we'll kind of split the difference here because this is a bottle that's been in my collection for some time. And sadly, I had the cork break on me, so I had to put in a temporary
Oh,
cork. Yeah, but this is the Glenfarclas family cask, and it is exclusively bottled for Willow Park Wine and Spirits. One of the nice things about being here in Calgary, by the way, this is bottle number 299 of 607. Bottled in June 28th of 2012, distilled in 2002. If you do your math, it's only 10 years old, but it is 60.6%, cask number 2196, bottled 700 ml bottles, and it is an exclusive distillery bottling. So what they've done, which I think when you have enough sort of polar relationships with Scotch distilleries, you can go in and say, look, we want to buy this cask, we want to buy this entire cask. We want you to bottle this entire cask, and we're going to be the exclusive seller of this cask. And what you end up getting, and again, why I like single cask bottlings from distilleries, is you get something that is Glenfarclas, but at the same time isn't Glenfarclas, and you get something that has characteristics you've never had out of a Glenfarclas before. So, interestingly, because it's only 10 years, you think, okay, well, it's a 10-year whiskey, it's probably not that expensive. Well, when you do a single cask bottling, it does drive the price up. It's not like a regular
yeah.
10-year. Because it's cask strength again. We just talked about the fact that you're losing a bottle for every two you bottle. So I love this whiskey, and there's a reason why I own it. I decided to go with one of their glasses. So talking about the glass, I've got the Willow Park glass here, and I do buy from a few different shops here. One of my favorite shops is Kensington Wine Market. We're not featuring one of theirs tonight. We're featuring Willow Park. You can see it's a little bit more of a dark amber color, a little bit more golden rather than straw. The nose is just so Glenfarclas. It's just that toffee and candied fruit. Like, to me, this is
Oh
probably
yeah.
like a Christmas whiskey. And I think you really only get that intense nose out of a cask strength. Oh, it smells so good. So, maybe what I'll do is talk a little bit about Glenfarclas. We'll do a quick break and come back. We've had Glenfarclas on the show a number of times. It's kind of one of my go-to whiskeys. I think I just looked and I have like 4 bottles of Glenfarclas. I've got
Wow.
this one. I've got a 21-year-old. I've got the 105. I think I've got a 15. It's just kind of one of those products that when I'm looking for a light, sweet whiskey that kind of hits all those light, sweet whiskey notes, Glenfarclas is an easy pick for me. They are a Speyside distillery. You mentioned that you were picking all Speysides tonight. Founded in 1836, and they are owned by the J&G Grant family. I've met one of the members of the family at a tasting. Super nice people. Their water source is the Ben Rennis Mountain, so it's a mountain stream. So that super crisp, super clean water. And their neighboring distilleries are Ben Rennis, Cragganmore, Daluane, and they do have. I think I've talked about this before. They have a tasting center, and if you can get into the tasting center, you're in for a treat. The distillery tour may not be one of the best distillery tours you've ever been on, but I guarantee you that tasting room will probably be one of the better tasting rooms you've ever been in, because they essentially have everything they've ever released on the shelf. And I understand that they're pretty generous about the pours and are likely to pour just about anything on that shelf for you. So if you're in the Scotland area, you probably want to put this one on your list. I'll take a quick moment here, just to remind our audience that you are tuning in to Sharing Our Pairings, episode 115. Davidoff Late Hour. We are smoking the Davidoff Late Hour, the newest release at the IPCPR 2017 in Las Vegas. I am your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, joined by Trippy Trent. As always, my co-host. Please stay tuned for word from one of our sponsors. This show is sponsored by Cigar Oasis. Don't spend all your time worrying about your cigar wrappers cracking, splitting, or falling apart from humidity fluctuation issues. Set it and forget it by choosing Cigar Oasis, a professional solution which provides equal distribution of humidity with precise electronic controls. Monitor your cigars through the internet using the smart humidor Wi-Fi attachment. Why don't you spend all your time enjoying your cigars and relaxing, and let Cigar Oasis protect your cigars? Cigar Oasis has solutions for any humidor. Make sure you set it and forget it today. And of course, you kind of mentioned pre-show at the start there, Trippy, that these whiskeys are sponsored by me. Because we kind of had a fun little tasting experience at the IPCPR, which I think we're going to try and do a little bit more of next year, where a bunch of us kind of brought in different, I guess you'd call them samples of some of the whiskey we've got at home. And kind of had an impromptu media party where we had a very small group over. And I think, it was a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed myself.
Yeah, that was a blast. I really enjoyed it. I wish that we had more time to do that, because our plan was dedicated night to that and kind of get back from the show and party all night, tasting whiskey, smoking cigars. But of course, we had so many commitments that we ended up going to dinner, then making an appearance at another party, and then not getting back to our room until like 11:15. But then of course we went till 3 or 4 in the morning.
It was good. Yeah, no complaints. So have you had a chance to take a sip yet of that delicious whiskey? You're leaning on your laptop.
Oops, sorry. I'm also drinking the Glenfarclas. I have not taken a sip yet, so I'm going to do that right now.
So I think at 60%, and certainly, we've talked about whether you add ice, whether you add water. I normally don't recommend adding ice to a whiskey because it does change your palate. When you have a temperature switch on the palate, it does change things up significantly. So I don't recommend ice. However, no one's going to look down on you if you add a little bit of water to a cask strength whiskey. 60% is a lot. That's a heater. It's a heater, yeah. So what were your first taste impressions there?
That's really good, and it's a lot smoother than I would expect for 60%. I mean, I think I've had up to 66 or so for cask strength, which is like on the really high end.
Yep.
But 60 is still pretty high. Like generally, it's between 50 and 60. But this one has like a strange approachability to it, where you feel the heat on the roof of your mouth and on your tongue a little bit, but it doesn't burn your palate like a lot of really, really high ABV whiskeys will. Which is actually really surprising that it's only 10 years. Yeah,
it's. I mean, not to be a whiskey snob or anything, but I normally won't drink any whiskey under 12 year, just because I find that the youngness of that alcohol, it's kind of like when you smoke a cigar and you say, well, this cigar is too young, it hasn't sat enough, it hasn't rested enough. I kind of get that out of whiskeys when it's that young. I find that there's an over-present young alcohol taste to it. And I really don't enjoy that taste. So really, for the most part, I'd say most of the whiskeys I drink are either a really nice blend or they have to be over 12 year. And this is one of the few 10-year whiskeys that I would say I enjoy. It definitely has a little bit of that rough alcohol under there, but the flavor complexity in there is remarkable.
Yeah, and then on the nose from this, it smells to me like I do get the toffee and the stewed fruits, but it smells like peach pie to me. A little bit of cinnamon and like that stewed peach kind of scent.
And I think that cinnamon really comes through on the palate and kind of mixed in with that alcohol strength, because you do get that alcohol burn, but you're left with that really nice cinnamon, maybe a little bit of nutmeg. The finish, I'd say, is kind of medium, and again, I think that lends itself as a result of the high ABV here.
Yeah.
For me, what it's doing to the cigar is kind of offset some of the little bit of spice that was in the cigar, and instead, I'm getting this huge cocoa note off the cigar now, which I really wasn't getting before. So this is a great pairing for me because, especially when I'm smoking a cigar sort of this fancy, this highfalutin, I do want a spirit to accent and maybe pull a little bit more out of the cigar than I was getting on its own.
Yeah, I completely get like that chocolatey note and a little bit of that like rich sweet oak, but I barely taste the spice anymore. And I find that as soon as you take a sip while the finish is still on your palate, take a puff of the cigar, and that's when you really get that kind of chocolate bomb kind of flavor.
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean the Toro, I have to say, especially after smoking the Churchill, I guess it's today, Monday,
Yes.
Saturday. So I smoked the Churchill on Saturday, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind. And I am definitely, for me, enjoying the Toro a lot more than the Churchill. Again, because I think the flavors are a lot more intense, less subdued, less subtle. So I think if you're a fan of the traditional type Davidoff, you're probably going to really gravitate towards the Churchill. If you're kind of
Hmm.
a fan of the new wave Davidoff, this is probably going to be more your speed.
Yeah, if you like full bodied, the Toro is definitely the Vitola for you. It's just so much more rich and spicy.
How we doing on audience questions, comments, feedback? We kind of snuck in a sneaky show here live. We didn't really broadcast or let people know in advance. Is anybody commenting or getting involved?
We got June watching.
You know, it's whiskey.
Oh yeah, he does. Um, and Todd Richter wanted to know if we've ever smoked a Gurkha His Majesty Reserve. I would smoke one. I wouldn't expect to love it.
Isn't that's the like $150 cigar, isn't it? Or
No,
two?
that's the $750 cigar.
Yeah.
It's aged with Louis the 14th cognac, or
Right.
15th, or whatever the Louis the number is.
Yeah, Gurkha might be a sponsor of the show, and they do give us some cigars, which we are going to do a Gurkha show in the near future.
Yeah.
But that is not a cigar that has made itself into our sampler pack. And I think Eddie said even
And he
Eddie
said they
Guerra.
won't. He said they won't give him one.
Yeah, I think he said he smoked one, and he smoked one because someone else gave it to him. So if one of the sales directors at Gurkha doesn't get a Majesty Reserve, they're probably pretty held back for people who are going to pay that money, not for people who are just trying to weasel.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think we're going to weasel any of those anytime soon.
I don't think it's going to happen, but we do have some really nice Gurkhas that came out of the show. The Cellar Reserve. Um, we actually smoked quite a few there and enjoyed a lot of them. They're kind of
Yeah,
bringing back some of those predicate releases and repackaging them. So undoubtedly in a few weeks, once we're done being on assignment, I think we're going to probably have a couple Gurkha shows and see what's what, as it were.
yeah. I think so. We definitely need at least one Gurkha show, because they've got some good stuff coming out of there now.
So I kind of just want to sit here and ramble on about this Glenfarclas because
Hmm.
it's really good. I really don't want to move on. I do have another whiskey, but I kind of don't want to move on.
Yeah, it's good.
It's
It's
good.
real good.
It's amazing how approachable a 60% ABV whiskey can be.
Yeah,
When you get that blend right.
and after a couple sips, you're not feeling that high ABV on your palate anymore. It
Yeah.
doesn't blow your palate out at all, and I really don't feel any kind of like that kind of numbness, tingling that you get from some high ABV. I don't get that from this at all.
Yeah, I think you do require a few sips for your palate to adjust. It's not something that you can just hop right into. In fact, the way that we pair a lot of whiskeys sometimes, especially tonight, we're probably doing it in the wrong way. You don't usually want to jump from whiskey to whiskey, especially with some of the high falutin stuff and some of the high ABV stuff that we've got.
Yeah,
But we're doing it anyways because it's our show and we can.
we do what we want.
We do what we want. So, with that in order, I'm going to switch to my last whiskey as we come down to our last break here. And I'm going in a bit of a different direction, going back to Japan, because I do like Japanese whiskeys, and I do find the Japanese whiskey complements cigars really, really nicely. And this is one that I'm surprised to say, looking through my show notes, I've never paired on the show before. And this is the Yoichi. And look at this bottle because I'm told that you really can't find it anymore as age statement whiskey continues to become harder and harder to find. Japanese whiskey has really garnered a lot of attention ever since being put in the whiskey Bible. People going a little nutty over it. So I'm not going to read the bottle here because it's kind of got a cool story in the back. So, single malt Yoichi, it is a 10-year whiskey. It's a single malt from the Yoichi distillery, which is the first distillery of Nikka in Hokkaido. Masataka Katsuro was the founder of Nikka. He selected this place because of its cool climate and natural environment, very similar to Scotland. They continue to adhere to techniques such as the use of coal-fired pot stills. You'll find that's very
Ooh.
rare. Almost all stills now are either direct steam or indirect steam fired. Um, uh, they say it's stored and matured for 10 years or more in oak casks, characterized by a fruity sweet nose and a smooth velvety palate. Again, it's 45% ABV, which is unusual. Most Japanese whiskey, we've talked about this in the shows before, is 43%. I'll hold it up. The color doesn't really tell you anything about this whiskey, but I'll hold it up for our live audience. So again, kind of like the first one, it's kind of got that straw golden color, nothing super fancy or remarkable. But to me, because I've had this many, many times, the bottle has been brought down a little bit from me sipping it, and I think it's probably pretty heavily peated by Japanese standards, but certainly not heavily peated by peat head standards, people who really enjoy Scottish whiskey. So I'll let you introduce your final whiskey of the night, and then maybe we'll take a quick break here.
So my final whiskey is from Glenrothes. Again, I don't have the bottle because it's sponsored by John. Glenrothes was founded in 1878. They're, of course, a Speyside distillery. They're actually really close to Inchgower. They use the same water source. This is another Speyside distillery that sells a lot of their whiskey for blended whiskeys. So this is also used. Well, not this particular whiskey. Glenrothes whiskey is used in Cutty Sark and Famous Grouse. And a unique thing about them that's not as unique as it used to be is that they sell by vintage rather than age. So this is Glenrothes 75. So it was distilled in 1975. And I think on the bottle it tells you when it was bottled, right?
Mm-hmm.
This particular one was bottled in 2006, making it 31 years aged. And this one is cut down to 43% ABV.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, I bought that bottle as a result of getting a new position with my previous company. I was very excited and I wanted to treat myself. At the time, it was a few ducats, and I think if you look at the whiskey market right now, what I paid for it then, it's probably worth 3 or 4 times what that was at this
I would
point.
guess that.
Yeah, but it was kind of one of those, crazy spends for me. But I really wanted a whiskey that was, for me, it was a birth year whiskey. So my birth year is 1975. For those out there keeping track and doing the math, that does make me 42 years old.
Old guy.
Old guy. But it's a great representation of a classic older whiskey. I think it's very nuanced. It's very delicate. Maybe not the right whiskey to be having after the cask strength that we just had, but I think you'll probably enjoy. Is this your first time having that? Have you had a?
Yeah, this is my first time, and I'm a fan. You're right. It's got that kind of classic aged whiskey flavor where it's taken on a lot more oak, and there's really not much. I mean, I am drinking it immediately after a 60% whiskey, but it doesn't have almost any burn or anything like that at all. It's very smooth, delicate, and nuanced. Interestingly, the nose, I don't get much except for like stewed fruit, like a little bit of toffee maybe or hard candy, like caramel. But the nose isn't as fruity as I would normally expect from a whiskey that's old.
This Yoichi that I'm enjoying, it is, you can definitely get that peat, but to me it's more along the lines of a like Oban or just it's a very light smoke. So it doesn't take over the spirit. So you get that light smoke up front, and then you get the character of the spirit, and the spirit kind of carries through. And by the time the finish comes in the spirit, that smoke is kind of gone. And that's kind of what I was hoping for. I wanted a little bit of peat to just experiment with this late hour and see how the peat matched up without taking over the profile entirely.
It's mainland heavily peated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what they would call heavily peated on Islay, but it's what they would call heavily peated everywhere else in Scotland.
Yeah, this is very delicate. It's got a little bit of that briny character to it. A little bit about Yoichi. Actually, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the Yoichi Distillery after our last break here. So just a reminder, audience, you are tuned into Sharing Our Pairings, episode 115, Davidoff Late Hour. Maybe you're tuned in live. Maybe you're watching on our regular scheduled time of Wednesday. Regardless, we're happy you tuned in. Thank you very much. I am the host, John the Cigar Surgeon, joined as always by Trippy Trent. Please stay tuned for word from one of our sponsors. Show brought to you by Drew Estate. Until June 30th, if you're a Drew Diplomat member, you attend a rewards program event and make a promotional purchase, you will receive a Liga Privada Velvet Rat. You'll also be entered to win a Drew Diplomat pewter ashtray, mega standing ashtray, or the Swag Closet Humidor, dubbed the Divorcinator. All these products were built and designed by Drew Estate Subculture Studios. If you're not a member, download the Drew Diplomat app from the Apple Store or Google Play Store today. So, of course, we're talking whiskey, we're talking the late hour, and it's good, man. I'm at the halfway point. I think I really am smoking this late hour way faster than I should be. But that's kind of what happens when you get a little bit of whiskey together with some cigars. It's pretty easy to start raging on that cigar.
Yeah, when I'm sitting alone, quiet by myself, smoking a cigar, I smoke really exceptionally slow. But I've noticed when I'm doing a show or just having a conversation, I tend to just, smoke when I have the chance.
Yeah.
And smoke a little faster.
So I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about Yoichi. They're a northern distillery. How north are they? Well, if you're to look at their latitude, they're actually at the same latitude as New York State, Toronto, Canada, or Vladivostok, Russia. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
So they're located in southern Hokkaido, and southern Hokkaido is the northernmost of the four main Japanese islands. What makes them unique, or why they were originally picked by Masataka Takatsuru, is because they are surrounded by three mountains. So three sides of the Yoichi are surrounded by mountains, and then the one side is the Sea of Japan. So you get that coastal influence, which makes a lot of sense if you're going to go with a peated whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very Scottish style of area. Unfortunately, as I mentioned or kind of alluded to, unfortunately, the demand for aged Japanese whiskey is outstripping their demand, so it is unlikely that you can find an aged Yoichi on the shelf. If you can find an aged Yoichi on the shelf and you are a Japanese whiskey fan, I definitely recommend you pick that up because you probably won't see it again, at least not within the next 5 to 10 years. It is unlikely the production is going to catch up unless there's a big crash in the Scotch / Japanese whiskey market. And at this point, it doesn't really look like that's going to happen anytime soon. I mentioned it's 45% ABV, and it is made with what they call heavily peated barley, what all the peat heads would call sort of medium peated barley. But it is a single malt. It is quite tasty. It is a 10-year. So I've got two 10 years, two 10-year expressions, but both are kind of interesting, unique whiskeys.
And now that I've had a little more time with the Glenrothes, I find that in contrast to the others, which are very kind of fruity and candy sweetness, this has more of a kind of malty sweetness, like you would get from a beer, like an amber ale. How they've got that malty body to them, and that's exactly what I'm getting from this whiskey. And I find that it's highlighting the spice from the cigar, which I really like.
Yeah, I'm kind of having a similar experience. The spice was very much gone with the Glenfarclas, because I think the Glenfarclas was just so intense and had that cinnamon nutmeg in it, which was taking away the spice of the cigar. Well, I'm not getting that in my Yoichi either. So I think that spice for me is also returned, which is nice. It's a good complement. You do get an interesting contrasting flavor with the peat whiskey, that smokiness against the sweetness and the spices. And again, I think it's a great pairing because it does tend to accent the whiskey, or accent the cigar, I should say. I don't think this is probably the way to go with this cigar. I don't think you want to go with a peated whiskey, but as I mentioned, I kind of wanted to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of experimentation. Yeah, because who knows when the next time is that I'll have a chance to smoke one of these delicious late hours.
Yeah, I'm getting pretty much the same experience for mine. They're very different whiskeys, but the kind of lighter, sweeter flavors from the Scotch are definitely highlighting the spicy, less so the chocolatey, more the spicy and sweet flavors. from the cigar.
Excuse me. Woo. Nice finish in the throat there with the whiskey. So I'm going to go over my whiskeys of the night here, kind of give a little bit of a recap, maybe do a little bit of sip as we go. So first whiskey of the night was the coffee grain whiskey from Nikka Whiskey. And it is a grain whiskey with a malted barley. So it's basically a combination of a single malt and almost a bourbon together. Although it can't be called bourbon because, it's not made in the United States. It's basically like Scotch can't be called a Scotch if it's made in Japan, but it still has the same core components. And it's really the mashup of a bourbon and a single malt to me. It's very approachable. It's easy drinking, but in terms of complexity, in terms of pairing, this is really a low 80s pairing, but I think really highlights how a score doesn't tell you the true story, because to me, it's kind of an 80-81 pairing. But it is enjoyable. I would reach for this. I would do this. It's fun.
And for me, the Inchgower, now that it's had a little time to warm up, it's still got that like hard candy, buttery kind of flavor that really highlights the cigar. This one would be mid 90s, like 95 maybe. I think I'm gonna have all 90s in here tonight.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So I'm gonna move on to this Glenfarclas. It's only a 10-year, but it is cask strength. Such a huge nose, so much toffee and vanilla and candied toffee on the nose. Almost has cotton candy in the nose, really. Such a huge palate, just enormous.
Cotton candy is the right word for it.
Yeah, and it does really take over the palate. A combination of the ABV and the huge sweetness there really does take over your palate significantly. And to me, that's with the cigar, especially this brings the cocoa out of the cigar, is an easy 93-94 pairing. One of those unique whiskeys that happens to pair really nicely with a cigar that's as elegant and as premium as the Late Hour is, I think, for me.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I'm drinking the same whiskey, and I agree. Those sweet candy. It really is kind of a candy sweetness. It's a very sweet whiskey, and it really brings out all of the chocolatiness that's in this cigar that I think if you weren't drinking this whiskey or something similar, you probably wouldn't get maybe any chocolate out of this. I don't think I tasted chocolate in either of the previous cigars that I've smoked.
Yeah, I'm immediately getting the chocolate back, having taken a sip of the Glenfarclas and then taking a few puffs in a retrohale. I immediately get that chocolate, and the chocolate disappeared with the coffee grain whiskey, and the chocolate disappeared with the Yoichi. It really only comes back with the Glenfarclas. So I think it really highlights how, if you have the right whiskey, you can bring out a lot of flavor out of a cigar that you might not otherwise be able to pick up. And to me, that's kind of one of the fun parts of pairing.
I forgot to give that one a number too, which I would say 93, 94.
Delicious. So I'm going to go on to my Yoichi here, even though I'm not leaving a lot of time between the Glenfarclas and the Yoichi. Still get that nice peaty, smoky peat up front, a little bit of brine, but again, very subdued compared to an Islay whiskey or something a little bit smokier if it was Scottish. Take a little puff here. Yeah, and the spice immediately comes back. Get that sweetness that has been prevalent along the entire cigar here. To me, this is probably, mid to high 80s, like an 87, 88. So this is, an acceptable pairing. It's a good pairing. I'd reach for this. But again, I don't think peat is the right way to go. I think you have the right idea with the highfalutin Speyside whiskeys, especially with a cigar of this caliber. You probably want a little bit more complex and a little bit more nuanced spirit to go with it.
Yeah, the Glenrothes, for me, goes really well with the cigar, just not quite as well as the others. I would give this a 90 or 91. It definitely brings out some of the sweetness, some of the spice in the cigar, but the cigar runs over the whiskey just a little bit. And that may be because I didn't drink this one first.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do tonight is we'll just roll right into an After Dark because we've got a little bit of cigar left. We've got some time.
Yeah.
And this is a cigar I want to keep smoking. So for those who are tuning in live, normally we would break here and go sort of separate our Armed Forces Radio Network segment, but we're going to go right into our After Dark segment and just kind of, shoot the breeze, as it were. So we do have some scheduling conflicts coming up, so we aren't going to be able to do a cigar chat this week, unfortunately. And next week we're going to not have a show, unfortunately, because we're both going to be on assignment
Together.
So we'll have kind of a cool show to follow that up when we come back. We'll kind of talk about that experience. So that'll be our basically 2 weeks from Thursday. We'll have a cigar chat. So I apologize to everyone. We're not going to have shows next week, but we are going to have some interesting content when we come back. That'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, so that means basically no sharing our pairings next week either.
Yeah, and then the week after that is when we'll be back to normal, and we'll have a cigar chat with a guest and everything, and we'll have hopefully sharing our pairings on Wednesday.
Although looking at my schedule, yeah, that may not be possible. Actually, we may have to talk and see if someone can stand in for me that week, because I'm looking at my schedule and I realize that I've actually got a store opening in 2 weeks.
I'm sure we can find somebody to fill in.
I'm sure we know. Yeah,
I know a couple guys.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason Raybuck wants to know if this cigar is worth $20. If you're in the market to spend $20 on a cigar, you would not be disappointed smoking this one.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. When you start getting to that $20 mark, the cigar that I always compare something like this to would be Davidoff Padron 1926. To me, that's kind of the hallmark for that sort of high teen $20 type smoke. That may be an unfair comparison, because in my mind, for the money, I don't know that you can really compete with the Padron 1926. I feel like I'm going to lose my Canadian flag here. As the storm front blows in here, we've been very lucky here in Calgary to not have the thunderstorms that we normally would. But it's just passing me by, just getting a little bit of the wind. But the Padron 1926 for me is kind of the class leader at that price point. So it's kind of an unfair comparison, because you're really comparing cigars at that price point to probably, arguably, one of the best cigars at that price point. So with that said, would I drop $20 American on one of these? Yeah, I probably would. It'll be interesting to, like I said, try the Robusto size and see how that fares. The Toro so far would be the Vitola I would reach for, though.
Yeah, me too. I've smoked all three now, and I would say the Toro is the best one.
Yeah, it's a very full flavored, rich experience. It's probably medium plus strength. It's got enough spice and baking spice characteristics in there to keep the more full bodied smokers entertained, I think.
Yeah.
Without boring them, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you're used to smoking like the Davidoff, I don't know what the series are, let's say, this might not be your speed, because it's a lot stronger than most of the Davidoff, most of the classic Davidoffs with the white labels are. But if you're into more full-bodied stuff, I think this is a great cigar for the price.
Yeah, and I would say the Churchill's probably similar to the Davidoff Nicaragua. This is probably a step up from the Davidoff Nicaragua in terms of flavor intensity, especially, like I said, with that spicy component. Yeah, try it for yourself. That's really the what we say isn't necessarily going to drive you to spend $20, but if you're in a shop and you want to try it out, there's lots of good Davidoff shops out there.
Yeah, and I think this is one of my favorite Davidoffs now. One of the best Davidoffs I've had.
Gotta flow you some of those Yamasas. So good.
I've only had, I think, one or two of those. It was when I was in Vegas on vacation, and I just picked one up from the Davidoff shop for $18 or whatever they wanted for it.
So, how are we doing? Any other closing questions, comments, or feedback from our live audience on Facebook there?
I don't believe so. Facebook is being kind of
Difficult.
Facebooky. So I need to refresh the page and see if we've got anything new. Nope. No other audience questions.
Fair enough. Well, maybe what we'll do is wrap up this episode of Sharing Our Pairings and just continue to smoke these delicious Davidoffs. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in live. We kind of snuck it in on you on Facebook. Thanks to all our podcast listeners who will be listening to this on Thursday morning when we normally post our podcast. Appreciate you tuning in and subscribing. And thanks to all our YouTube listeners out there. As we mentioned, in future episodes, we're going to go to a YouTube stream only. But do not fear.
Facebook stream only.
Facebook live stream only, but we are going to broadcast the show after. So kind of like if you're PVRing your episodes of whatever, Game of Thrones or whatever, you can watch it after we live air. But I want to thank everyone who has tuned in. As we say on Share Your Pairings, we do want you to drink better, but we do want you to drink less.